clear half an hour with us. We'll complete the discussion by 5 o'clock. As usual, the tea break is cancelled. In face-to-face conference, we cancel tea break, cancel coffee break, but here in virtual also we have these sessions for offering, and we are cancelling tea break, and we have clear half an hour now till 5 o'clock when we'll go to the next theme session. So with this, I invite the moderators to take over and start the panel discussions. Professor Shwai and Professor
question to all the panelists that in this COVID pandemic, what the challenges they have faced in diabetic patients in treating in COVID care. All the panelists can give their own opinions.
Starting from me, I am the junior most one probably in this, but I have seen many cases along with Dr. Banambar sir in our ICU also. The worst challenges in this COVID time in managing a diabetic patient is managing the sugar part. Because we are giving steroid to almost all COVID patients, managing the pneumonia. The managing sugar part is the most difficult one. As far as my experience is concerned, we have given Lantus in the BT doses. As far as 50 unit of Lantus has been given, means long-acting insulin. Along with that, short-acting insulin at the dose of around 60 units. So per day requirement would be around 100 to 130 units, but still the sugar was not been controlled in most of the cases. It was a harassment for all of us. Till the steroid level was been decreased by the improvement of the patient. Apart from the difficulty in treating the COVID patient, there was no much of medication with us. And critical care part is also the difficult part. Was the patient, those who are not responding to conventional treatment. Proning of the patient after the patient being put on ventilator was another difficult part. Banambar sir knows how much difficult it was to the patient to revive whenever patient was put in a tube. And the other part was the secondary infection was another point I want to address. Patient was recovering initially, but the secondary infection or hospital-acquired infection was the most difficult part to start with in the second phase of treatment. And most of the patients were succumbing after the secondary infection, especially those patients who have recovered from COVID and again readmitted. So these are the difficult parts from my end. Sir would be admitting these things and maybe adding few more. Banambar sir, please.
Well, thank you, Srikanth. Almost all those patients who have been admitted to the intensive care unit and who have not been able to make it have died of hyperglycemia and infections. Infections have been a permanent feature, and along with the infections, the blood sugar control has been absolutely haywire. No matter how much insulin we have given intravenously, but within 180, I do not think any patient had within 24 hours, all the figures were within 180. It has been quite erratic, right? Some patients, could have had hypoglycemia, but we never say hypoglycemia in such patients. All these patients were on dexamethasone or methylprednisolone, and as Srikanth said, they had very high levels of blood sugar, and insulin you give, you go on increasing, and the insulin would not be kind of effective in controlling the blood sugar. So this is one point. I do not know how much diabetes would have contributed to the death, but certainly all these patients had very, very severe infections, and those of them bearing two who died of bleeding, but others actually died of very severe infection, not responding to the highest antibiotics like polymyxin or colistin or meropenem. Of course, is no longer a very fashionable drug now. I think only 40% sensitivity we have. But all these drugs, minocycline we have given, have been also very, very ineffective. So therefore, infection has been a very severe cause of death in such patients, and hyperglycemia must be contributing to this. Hypoglycemia, we did not have it. He talked about proning, and proning as such is not very particularly, we are concerned about hyperglycemia. Whether you prone or you do not prone, but blood sugar control would be always a challenge in COVID, very sick patients.
Yeah, so Samir Sahu now, his opinion in Amri Hospital.
See, the first thing which I would like to say is one thing which has not been pointed out is in the ICU, because of the stress factor, a lot of non-diabetics are hyperglycemic. So they also need importance. Okay. So that is one thing you should understand. So we have three types of patients in the ICU with hyperglycemia. One who are never diabetic, the other one who is first time detected as diabetic, and the third one who is already known diabetic. So in this pandemic, because we started using steroid universally for people who were not even hypoxic, we converted everyone to hyperglycemia. And we did an audit of all our patients. In August, our glycemic uncontrolled, glycemic control was so poor that only 30% were glycemic control, 70% were not in control. In September, we improved a little to around 60%. In October, we improved a little to around 50%. So 50% of our patients of COVID were not controlled. Glycemic control was poor. The second thing was the protocol got completely battered. See, one thing again I want to point out from what Nivedita told in the lecture was glycemic control in the ICU is a nurse-driven protocol. And the protocol has to be more simpler. What Nivedita Pani projected to you in a lecture, you will never be able to understand the protocol. So each ICU has to have a separate and simplified protocol which the nurse has to understand. And unfortunately, the physicians of Bhubaneswar, at least with whom I am interacting, we still have that sliding scale concept. The sliding scale concept doesn't control your blood sugar. So the two things are there. Your protocol has to be nurse-driven and simple, which the nurse can understand. And there should not be a sliding scale concept of controlling blood sugar. If these two things, if we don't do, we are not going to achieve glycemic control in our ICU. So during the COVID pandemic, the protocol got battered. There was shortage of nurses. Then there was rotation of nurses. So the nurses who actually were conversant with the protocol were not doing the duty. They were changing every 3 weeks. So the high glycemic control became very bad during the COVID times.
So Dr. Sarmili, what are the challenges you faced in Apollo?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this wonderful opportunity. Regarding, as all my previous colleagues said, and most recent Dr. Samir Sahu, I would like to agree with him. During COVID times, to all moderate hypoxic to severe critically ill patients, we are giving steroids. That was the main cause of hyperglycemia. Either patients who were already diabetic or who were first time to detected to have diabetes in the after admission, or the hyperglycemia was induced by steroids. So as he said rightly, that when this patient is critically ill, and especially who is on a ventilator, the best idea the way to control blood sugar is by very intensely monitoring it. And if it is persistently remaining beyond 250, it is best to start insulin infusions, at least hourly or 2 hourly blood sugars, and starting at infusion, and then achieving our protocol, the goal sugar levels bit less than 180 or at least 200 if you are being little liberal. That's the way to go about it. And after 2 to 3 days, once the blood sugar are kind of normalizing or coming to a level, you can calculate your daily doses and you can convert it to the subcutaneous doses. But when the patient is critically ill on very high level of organ support, usually the sliding scale protocol do not work. Number two is especially when, as Dr. Shrikant mentioned, that when the patient is made prone, it is difficult to also take the blood samples from the fingertips, etc. We kind of realized these problems in the mid of the pandemic. Around October, November, we realized that sampling is an issue. So for all such patients who are being prone on ventilator, we made a protocol to put a femoral central line and arterial line before they were made to prone, and they were continuously collecting samples every 2 hours or 4 hours to monitor the blood sugars. Number 3 is the dose and the duration of steroids that were being used. As Dr. Rai has rightly pointed out, most of these patients were moderately or severely hypoxic, were on either dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. Actually, what we found is till the end of October, probably we were using a bit higher dose of steroids because there was not much evidence in support, concrete evidence in support of other medicines to be used in COVID cases. We're using higher doses of steroids and also for longer duration of longer duration. Then actually, as the more literature started coming out, we started winning down the doses of steroids. We make and also the duration we kept to between 10 to 14 days, not beyond 14 days. Because we have found that due to high uses of steroids, not only hyperglycemia was a challenge to be addressed, also the incidences of MDR organisms, multi-drug resistance organisms, and even a couple of cases of pan-drug resistance organisms also propped up. And as Dr. Jagar and previous speakers have mentioned, that diabetes not only increases the propensity or susceptibility to infections, also the rate of recovery gets affected, delayed. The antibiotics take longer time to kill the organisms in a hypoglycemic environment. And this was also another cause where there was higher incidences of fungal infections. Now, you know that fungal infections are another separate challenge in terms of detections because you do not have any straightforward ways as opposed to bacterial infections to suspect or diagnose fungal infections. And in this period of 8 months, we have found that higher incidences of fungal infections, at least according to the Candida score, we had more of fungal infections. And I'll just quote one patient who had, there was an 87-year-old man, and he was on ventilator for 23 days, successfully extubated, shifted to COVID ward, and thereafter he started having fever. And hemodynamically, he was stable, but he started having fever. So we screened him for everything, and the blood culture showed Candida auris. Candida auris is today's time is the most notorious and the most refractory Candida to be treated. So this is the thing, I think, apart from usual bacterial infections, also the incidence of fungal infections had also increased. The classic diabetics, which get this mucormycosis, invasive mucormycosis, those are a different cases. But in COVID cases, we found that bloodstream-related infections had also do with the hypoglycemic states.
That because of prolonged ICU stay, prolonged ventilation, yes. Prolonged intubation.
As well, yeah.
So as you know,
actually, one thing, Dr. Thatte, I want to put here. Actually, we had a nice session about the COVID-19 through the lens of diabetes in the morning, and we have taken many issues related to COVID. Actually, good that we had one round of COVID and diabetes issues. We'll also go about diabetes and critical care issues, because COVID is definitely important, but before COVID and after COVID, what are the issues that we must cover are very important. Harshit, please allow my video also.
Okay, so thing is that because since we have separated session on COVID, now we can focus on diabetes in critically ill patients or critical care diabetes. So my point is that why, in ICU, in Odisha particularly, so what are the major infections which causes life-threatening in diabetes in Odisha, in our part? Yes, sir.
Can I talk?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have a data of 10 years from 2000 to 2010 of all sepsis in the ICU. Like Dr. Jagar was telling, I cannot tell you offhand because I have not reviewed my slides, but the diabetes was a very common incidence. The most common infections in the ICU were pneumonia, and second most common infections in the ICU were urinary tract infection. Okay, so that was one part. But what I was telling you is all the patients in the ICU, around 10 to 15% of patients will have hyperglycemia without diabetes. So that is why our protocol in the ICU is everyone gets a blood sugar done every day, at least 3 times a day. When the patient comes in and is sick, it is done every 4 hourly. If the blood sugar is uncontrolled, we start infusions. So it is by protocol, glycemic control is a daily job. Just like you are monitoring your blood pressure, your urine output or your pulse and other things, blood sugar control or glycemic control is a daily vital parameter for the ICU. That is one part. Second part is, I told you, blood sugar control has to be not by sliding scale. So you have to take in, see, the doctor has to think. There are three things to think. One is, what is the stress factor which is increasing the blood sugar? What is the nutrition factor? How much calories you are giving? And then what is his baseline blood sugar requirement? The third thing which Dr. Srikanth was telling about lung test. See, in my experience, most of the patients have some renal dysfunction in the ICU. So during the initial days, we do not need long-acting insulin to control the diabetes. Up till now, I have a patient who had come with sepsis, abdominal sepsis, and cellulitis, and the scrotal abscess. 15 days down the line, he is still controlled with short-acting insulin. Although he came with AKI, his creatinine is now 0.9, but he is still uncontrolled with short-acting insulin. So what we do is, we do blood sugar 3 times a day before the meals. We do another blood sugar at 2 a.m. in the night to see the hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia with short-acting insulin. And the other experience which I have got is, you do not need long-acting insulin in the acutely ill patients in the ICU, because most of them will have some sort of renal dysfunction even if the creatinine is normal. So you need just long-acting insulin only when the patient is stable to go at home, he's sitting up, eating on his own. This is my take about the diabetic control inside the ICU.
Okay, Thakur, can I answer? Can I?
Yes.
To answer that question, actually, the life-threatening infections that we encounter in uncontrolled diabetics are mainly the urinary tract infections in my setup. And second is only hospital-acquired pneumonia, be it hospital-acquired or ventilator-associated pneumonia. The organisms most commonly implicated are the three ones which are notorious these days throughout the India, are Klebsiella pneumoniae, Acinetobacter, and Pseudomonas, and closely followed by E. coli and the resistant gram-positives.
Just want to answer about Dr. Samir Sahu. The Lantus has not been given to almost all patients initially. Whenever it is not controlled, especially in COVID patient, we have tried. That's why I'm saying that it has been tried to the maximum limit, but still we could not control. That is one thing. Another thing, we have also published a case of 1135 cases comparing two groups, one diabetic, one non-diabetic, and cases as Dr. Jaggar, I also quote always his presentation, his publication. We have got 34% versus 29% as a cause of diabetes and infection as the cause of mortality in our hospital. Some hospital.
That is there because diabetes.
As Dr. Sarvili said,
what is the common infection you have found out in your hospital? What are the common infection you have found out?
Sir, in our publication, this is one paper. Another paper in our publication, as Sarmili said, E. coli is the common infection in, especially in ICU patient. UTI was the first one, followed by respiratory infection. And E. coli, Pseudomonas, and Acinetobacter was the common organism, and all are registered. We have gone through the resistant pattern, and almost they are resistant to most of the antibiotic. I have got a paper, but we cannot discuss here itself.
Okay.
What are the sensitive antibiotics?
Then my question.
What are the sensitive antibiotics you are giving?
Dr. Thatoi, to add to what Dr. Sahu, Srikanth, and Sarmili have said, there are also many other infections. Urinary tract infection and pneumonias are certainly the commonest. You know, there are cases, pneumonias who are non-COVID viral pneumonias, which I think we have seen almost equal number, because 3-4 times we have done the RT-PCR coming negative. So you have got to treat them as non-COVID viral pneumonias, similar presentations. And also there are, cases of meningoencephalitis. There are intestinal infections. There are quite a few cases of pancreatitis, which later on actually go into infections, right? So, and also there are some hepatitis patients. So these are some of those rarer, but not so rare again, but certainly not as common as urinary tract and pneumonias. Yes. Right. So these are the infections that we normally see, and diabetics, of course, or non-diabetics also, they come up with high blood sugar in such cases. Particularly if you start steroid, meningoencephalitis, you do again give steroids, right?
Yeah.
So they do generally present with hyperglycemia.
That will you regularly advocate all diabetics and those who are seniors to take influenza vaccines and also pneumonia, particularly pneumonia 23 strain vaccines regularly? So that can prevent. So our approach is we educate people
The
and
pneumococcal vaccine, we always say after the age of 50, if you are a diabetic, you take it. If you are not a diabetic, take it after the age of 60. And flu vaccine, of course, every year you have got to take. That is what normally I follow it for the last almost 15 years now. So I think one needs to take that. This is what I would like to add.
My question to Dr. Samir Shah, sir, how many cases pneumonia you have seen who have taken already vaccinated for pneumonia? They came with a community acquired pneumonia, or also flu vaccine. They come with swine flu or something like that, viral pneumonia, non-COVID viral pneumonia.
I cannot tell you because I have not analyzed these things nor kept enough data for this. But what Dr. Banamara said, all my patients, let it be COPD or other patients who come to me in the OPD, everyone is vaccinated for influenza vaccine 50 plus and pneumonia vaccine. So pneumonia, my schedule is I give the conjugated vaccine first and then follow it with the other pneumovax 1 year after, and that is all it finishes. But influenza vaccine you have to take every year, especially in September.
Sir, in choosing empirical antibiotics in ICU, choosing empirical antibiotics ICU, is there any difference between diabetic patient with sepsis and non-diabetic patients in sepsis?
See, the first thing is you have to have your own data. Sir. Most of the patients which we are getting, because I was telling you, the most of the bacteremia which we get into the ICU, where the blood culture is positive, most of them were urinary tract infection, and most of them were from the community, and most of them were E. coli. So every 6 months, I analyze my blood cultures, the other cultures, and the organisms which we grow in the ICU.
Is there a difference? Choice of
no difference. No difference. No difference.
No difference.
No.
So the
and my E. coli is 40 to 50% sensitive to carbapenems, almost 100% sensitive to cholestins. So we start off with carbapenems, and then if the patient doesn't improve, then we go into cholestins. But otherwise, for Klebsiella, sometimes we have to use fosfomycin. But we are getting a lot of resistant organisms from the community. So patient coming from the community with UTI are having resistant E. coli. Only the sensitivity pattern of carbapenems is around 40 to 50%. So that is worrying. That is worrying. But diabetic and non-diabetic, no difference.
No difference. So choosing colistin, are we giving single colistin or adding some other antibiotic? Because
normally we continue with the carbapenem and add on colistin. But most of the community-acquired UTI, they improve with carbapenems. They don't need colistin unless until they are complicated UTI, and you have to do, like Dr. Jagar was saying, pyelonephritis and all those things, where you need to do some surgical intervention.
So, Dr. Sarmili, so how often you come across hypoglycemia, acute complication in your ICU?
Yes, hypoglycemia is definitely a documented phenomenon in patients who are admitted in ICUs, because most of for the patients, especially who are given a night dose of Lantus, and they would have, if they're on oral diet or if they're on the nasogastric feed, sometimes there is disparity. Sometimes if they're given a diet, they may not have completed the full course, or the rice to feeding which you have given might have been aspirated, and as a protocol, overnight from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. there is no feed is administered. So around 20% of cases, at least in a month, we see one episode of hypoglycemia. But the good part is because our protocol is so designed that we usually record the morning blood sugar between 5 to 6 a.m. So for the patients who are on ventilator, who are suppose comatose, the sugar is monitored around that time. So even if it is there and the patient is on organ support system, they do not manifest those classic sympathetic signs, but they're given a sachet of sugar or the IV dextrose. But it is definitely there, around 20%, I would say, in my ICU. At least one episode.
I think, sir, what Shamili said is absolutely right. In the ICU, hypoglycemia cannot be sort of, put under the carpet. Hypoglycemia is very quickly recognized because nurses will be, particularly in the night, early hours of the morning, they will be certainly able to detect it. And we have never had a case where they could not detect hypoglycemia. However, patients in the wards, we have had code blues with hypoglycemia. Right, 4 o'clock, there will be sudden cardiac arrest and patient comes to the ICU and you find that the blood sugar is 10, 12, 14, like that. So therefore, in the wards, it is certainly a problem. I'm sure, I think in almost all the hospitals, this must be the situation. But ICU, we do not sort of see complications due to hypoglycemia. There are situations where we find blood sugar coming down to 60, 55, but then no damage done.
So there is
how we can prevent this hypoglycemia in the ICU?
So that is
in the ICU, we have a little higher level for hypoglycemia.
Right.
If the patient is less than 100 and is symptomatic, we call it hypoglycemia. If the patient is sedated, like Shamili was saying, we take 70 as hypoglycemia. So we have a little higher level for hypoglycemia in the ICU because we do not want patients to go into hypoglycemia in the ICU. Okay, we would rather keep it a little higher rather than have hypoglycemia, because hypoglycemia is known to cause more damage than a little bit of hyperglycemia in the ICU.
One should avoid the tight glycemic control and should keep it around 80 like that.
And should have eye over
Especially renal compromised patient, we should be more cautious.
Exactly, particularly renal compromised patient. So since our more audience are physicians here, so better we can physicians. Many of our audience discussing in the forum initially are physicians. They are not involved in ICU care or etc. They even see patients in small set of hospitals in wards. So better we will discuss now very practical, valid point for them. So the thing is that how to handle, sir, hyperosmolar coma in ward. They are not in ICU, in ward, hyperosmolar coma, because they are severely dehydrated. Which fluid is ideal in infusing hyperosmolar coma?
Basically, we start with ringerlaxtate and then follow it up. See, there are two things to be seen. One is the pH, second is the bicarb. Okay, if you have a ABG, it's well and good. But if you do not have ABG in a small nursing home setup, ringerlactate is the ideal fluid. You can do at least sodium potassium every 3 times in a day and get the reports and adjust your fluids and electrolytes accordingly. But the insulin infusion has to be there, and the cause for hyperglycemic coma, HHS, has to be taken care of. That is important.
If ABG is not there and somebody is thinking of decay, then better send quickly for urine ketone body. If ketone body is there, then it is decay. If ketone body is not, if ABG is there, pH in acidotic range, so it is decay. If pH is normal, above dehydrated, so it's more HHS. So if ABG is not there or not available in small set of centers, so better go for urine ketone body assay in managing this diabetic comas. So then the insulin titration. So they don't have syringe pump, they don't have infusion pump. How can they titrate insulin in a comatose patient? So I am keeping a large area of Odisha. So keeping in a district.
Yeah, okay. So all you have to do is put insulin into a normal saline or ringerlactate and increase the drip rate up and down. But you have to go on doing the blood sugar every hour.
That is the take home message. Blood sugar evaluation frequently is the take home message in the cornerstone managing a diabetic coma. That valid point, sir. Then, sir, which antibiotic of choice in those setups?
See, it all depends on what is the infection. But if you are having diabetic ketoacidosis because the patient has come in for the first time there is no infection, you don't need any antibiotics. People come to diabetic, have come with diabetic ketoacidosis by missing the second dose. There also you don't need any antibiotics. If you can confirm an infection or you suspect an infection, then you can give an infection. And the antibiotic will depend on what is the site of infection. If it is urine, the antibiotic will just. If it is skin and soft tissue, the antibiotics will be different. Okay. If it is pneumonia, the antibiotic.
Well taken up, well taken care. So the thing is that if a person is diabetic with fever, altered sensorium, febrile, and bit TLC high, C-reactive protein is a minimum investigation in a district headquarter level, then that can say the person is infected or not infected. So these points are well taken care of. Then to give insulin, because we don't have syringe pump, so great difficulties are there. So obviously they will go for the infusion in drip, but frequently, at least 2 hourly apart, they should go for rapid work for HGT, hemoglobin test. So my question to sir, how many patients have you seen mucormycosis in DKA patients? To Dr. Sharmili.
All the mucormycosis which I have seen are diabetic patients.
Sir.
Some of them will come in with diabetic ketoacidosis. I just had another patient recently now who has just been discharged with mucormycosis from the right maxillary sinus, which spread to the right ophthalmology, rhinoceros, and then went to the left eye, and in the meantime she developed hemiplegia, as ischemic stroke. So we had to do conservative. We actually did the surgery of the right maxillary sinus and right eyeball we took out, but because the left eyeball also got infected and she had hemiplegia, the patient family didn't want to disfigure her anymore, so we left her home. So all the mucors are diabetic, definitely, but some of them will come with diabetic ketoacidosis. But you have to have a high suspicion and do surgery urgently if you want to save those patients, apart from amphotericin B liposomal.
So the choice of antifungal is amphotericin B.
Amphotericin B liposomal, but now isavuconazole is coming up. Isavuconazole has been marketed in India by Pfizer. It's coming up.
Dr. Thatoi, I would like to just add that you asked about that mucormycosis that I have witnessed in my practice. In last 10 years at Apollo, I would have seen around 12 cases of invasive mucormycosis. And as he said, like it requires local management and then antibiotics and glucose control. Antibiotic wise, amphotericin B or liposomal amphotericin B are the choices. But I think sugar control remains one of the most important aspects of it. But the other observation is that these patients are also get affected with other secondary infections, other MDR, multi-drug resistant secondary infections. So whenever they die of or whatever the worst outcome is, it's not due to mucormycosis per se. It is also due to this secondary infections, which take a downhill course, and the patient mostly succumb to it.
Okay, so
Thank you, Dr. Assessment is the key part in amphotericin
One
B.
second.
We are approaching the end of the panel discussion. Dr. Kanungo has surfaced just to remind us, I think. Actually, we'll take the last take-home message from all the panels because 5 o'clock is the next session, the theme 11. And my good friend, Dr. Shabu has already joined. Our panel are gradually coming up, Rajiv and others. So it was a very informative session. As Dr. Thatoi has already pointed out, many are not into critical care, but they should know the critical care procedures, starting from Dr. Jargar, who told about the Indian scenario of infection and people dying in the infection more than the cardiovascular, renal, or any other complications. We have taken up issues starting from the hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia, sepsis, COVID, and discuss the ICU thing. So before I go to moderators, I'll ask our panelist. Dr. Jargar is there. I think sir has left. Actually, he told a few of the best thing that more than thinking of what will happen after 10 years to the patient's kidney-wise, heart-wise, let us control the infection and prolong the life of our diabetic. That should be the message. And starting from Professor Rai, I'll ask, what is your message, sir, in the theme of critical care in diabetes? Professor Banambar Rai.
Diabetes in critical care is a huge, issue, and it has got to be controlled. And insulin therapy is the only one, intravenous infusion is the only thing that we could do when the patient is infected, and particularly the patient is in septic shock. Even before patient goes into septic shock, I think we should really control the blood sugar so that we at least contribute to not developing patient septic shock a little while later. So therefore, diabetes is a huge problem, and we must control it. There must be a strict protocol as to how we should control it. We should not really be doing after looking at the blood sugar, as Dr. Sahu has said, and then you control it. You should prevent a blood sugar rise, and therefore you have to be extremely critical. A nurse has to sit taking a chair and control it. Hourly you do it blood sugar, or 2 hourly you do, but you have got to control it. No blood sugar level should be more than 200 in the 24 hours period. Alas, it doesn't happen. We have seen only 2% of cases it happens. So therefore it means that our monitoring is not good. So therefore my message to all of us is that our monitoring must be very strict, and we must be doing it at the bedside, not from the central station.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that precious pulse of wisdom. I'll come to Dr. Shamir Sahu. He's saving lives day in and day out. And sir, your take home for our delegates today from the panel of critical care in diabetes.
See, in the ICU, at least 60-70% patients will have hyperglycemia. Many of them will not be diabetic. Insulin is the mainstay. Most of the time it will be short-acting insulin. But for infusion, it has to be a nurse-driven protocol. But infusion, you will have hardly 1% or 2% of cases in the ICU. But most of them will be on subcutaneous insulin. Our doctors, the doctors have to be trained how to understand how the dose of insulin according to the monitoring which the sisters do and give the right dose. That knowledge is not there with the doctors. They are still using that sliding scale system, which is actually puts the glycemic control into a very poor control stage. So our doctors have to be taught how to guess the dose and how to adjust the dose according to the calorie, according to the stress, and according to the basal requirement of the patient. So we have to stress how to teach our doctors how to control glucose inside the ICU.
Rightly told, sir. There are many opinions regarding the capacity building. Yeah, Professor Swami.
In addition to managing hyperglycemia, they must prevent hypoglycemia. As Dr. Rai, many people in the early morning, they are going and dying.
That is equally important.
That's the thing. The upper limit should be around 160 to 180, so that at least you take a little upper limit rather than strict glucose.
Dr. Rai mentioned at any time it should not cross 200. So that is the maximum limit is 180.
Ideal.
Thank you. Then I will come to Professor Dhar. Quickly tell your take home, Professor Dhar.
Yes, sir. Insulin has been addressed by most of the senior agents. I will address one thing. Every hospital should be an antibiotic stewardship for us, and we should have a local consensus about the antibiotic use. That is the main corner of infection, is the most common thing for the sepsis and management we are managing in the ICU. So we should have a consensus in the Odisha itself and treat early to save the life is my final word.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for pointing out that important issue again. And finally, Dr. Sharmili. She has been working in the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, and every step she tries to disseminate the knowledge. So already you have a message, you have to train the glycemic control, antibiotic stewardship, and anything you want to add, Dr. Sharmili?
I would just add to that by saying we have to take critical care training to the periphery, to train the paramedics and the junior doctors and my physician colleagues who are doing a tough job at the peripheral level. We have to start it from the grassroots level so that patients don't deteriorate. And any diabetic coming to presenting to their respective healthcare centers, If they are not improving after of course monitoring and sugar titration, they should be have a lesser threshold to refer them early. If they are not clinical, suppose somebody becoming comatose or organ dysfunctions like respiratory distress or tachypnea or fall in blood pressure, there must be some underlying sinister cause. So there should be have a early referral system should be there.
Very, very aptly told. I'll again appeal Alok Sir, so along with the diabetes care, because he has done critical care during last COVID. Also, this part has to be seen that everybody is trained. Like yesterday, we were discussing about the insulin therapy, in inertia to the insulin initiation. Similarly, the critical care, the blood glucose monitoring, all the issues are to be taken to the doorstep of the doctor, so that more and more doctors are well versed in this. And before we close, we'll listen to our moderators also. Professor Shwai and Professor Thatoi, your final message to our people.
So my final message with antibiotic stewardship and insulin in ICU setups, at least if it goes more than 250 or 300 sugar, better to go with a infusion of insulin. Adding that, my point is strict infection control protocols, because a lot of our infections are our in-house infections. So that is the important thing. Stay safe, wash your hand before touching and after touching, like COVID. Also in all ICUs, separate things for ICU. Those small setup hospitals, those are having Amri or in some Ultimate and Apollo, they are the different issues. But those are listening in small setup hospitals, don't use the same stethoscope everywhere. Don't use the same hand everywhere. So strict infection control protocol may check a barrier, may prevent spreading infection in ICU.
Fine. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thatoi. Professor Swai, you will say something to our people.
Thank Dr. Jargar for his beautiful lecture on diabetic infections, and also Nivedita about the critical care. And for regarding the treatment of hyperglycemia with insulin, there must be good control, but not, they should avoid hypoglycemia or hypoglycemic coma or death due to that. So that should be with all ICU intensivist and all that. And as Dr. Dhar has pointed out, a stewardship, antibiotic stewardship, in akin to their own hospital, and what is the antibiotics, what is they are common to their hospital and the organism isolated in them, they should follow with a good protocol, and it should be followed by everybody. And time to time also it should be modified according to the necessity. And the complications they must handle also very carefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. With this, we come to an end. I hand over this session to Dr. Kanungo and request him to extend a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you. I am personally thankful to Dr. Banambar Rai and Dr. Samir Bhai, Srikant, Dr. Prabhat Thatoi, Sarmili. With the last moment also she agreed. Dr. Swai and Jayant yourself. And this session was excellent, and we'll have many more opportunity to discuss like this. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to meeting you again. Thank you.